Hi, this is Nick Earl, and welcome to the IoT Leaders podcast. I'm SI's CEO. So, this week's episode is different because for the first time, what we're going to do is talk to an operator, and it's TELUS, and her name is Jodi Baxter. And she has been instrumental right from doing her MBA, as you will hear, in pursuing a vision, which is a collaborative model between the operators to deliver global IoT. And this resulted in TELUS making a decision to white label our platform as a global eSIM platform for them to become a global operator about 4.5 years ago. And we talk about that on the podcast of what's happened since. And then we talk about what's going to happen in the telecom industry and 5G in particular, because she's also responsible for 5G and industry solutions for TELUS, and all the developments around multi-RAT, 5G, explosion of sensors, billions of devices, and how, in her view, all of these developments, which will play out, satellites will play out over the next few years, all of which require a totally new model for the industry, which is one based on inter-operator collaboration, and how she believes federations or alliances like Star Alliance model are needed in order to deliver value to customers. So I think it's a very good one, whether you're from the enterprise side of the world, or very definitely relevant if you're in the operator world. TELUS were the first people to white label our platform. Others have followed since. And so she's speaking from 4 years of experience in doing this and seeing great success outside their home markets in now selling truly global deals. So it is a really good one. She's a very good friend of SI, knows as well, and we're very pleased that she agreed to do the podcast. So here it is, my interview with Jodi Baxter, who's the VP of 5G and Industry Solutions at TELUS in Canada. Enjoy. So Jodi, welcome to the IoT Leaders podcast.
Thanks, Nick. It's really nice to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. Now, we've known each other for quite a while. TELUS and SI have been partners for quite a while. In fact, that's what we're going to be talking about and the reasons behind that, and what's happened since then. But before we do all of that, I really want to kind of get to know Jodi here for our listeners and indeed any viewers watching it on video, because you're the Vice President of 5G Industry Solutions at TELUS in Canada. So what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's a bit of a generic title sometimes.
Yeah.
People wonder. It's good. It's a conversation starter. Yes, at TELUS, I've actually been at TELUS for a very long time. I've got 20 plus years at TELUS. My current role at TELUS is leading our 5G strategy, which is inclusive of our connectivity strategy for Internet of Things, as well as the industry solutions that we want to bring into the market. So we're very focused in worker safety, as well as fleet telematics from a solutions perspective. And so my focus right now is how do we bring to market greater value for our customers and enable the significant investment that we've made in 5G.
And within that, that encompasses IoT.
IoT, yeah. And on the IoT space, we're not just looking at and why we have had a long time relationship, we don't just look at our domestic IoT capabilities in Canada, but how we're enabling our customers to move outside of Canada on a global level and take advantage of eSIM and multi-SIM switching capabilities.
Right. And that's exactly where we're going to go. But before we go, as the Americans say, let's put a pin in that. Before we go there, now you've been TELUS 20 years, but maybe we can delve back a bit further without trying to disclose age. But I win anyway. I'm the older anyway, so I win. But what were you doing before that? What's the background? How did you end up at TELUS essentially?
Yeah, so well, how I ended up at TELUS was honestly right out of university, and somebody told me I should apply for this role at TELUS, and I thought, okay, I'll go try this out for a few months until I
Right.
get my office at the top. But then that turned into actually a 25-year career, where I've had many, many roles. But how I got into IoT specifically is actually a really interesting journey. I spent 7 years in TELUS Health. And during that tenure in TELUS Health, I was very focused on how we're bringing information and enabling solutions for our end providers, specifically in the practitioner space, so physician and pharmacy. And during that time, I was offered an opportunity to complete an MBA through a program that actually TELUS put on. So it was with a cohort of 20 of my peers at TELUS at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. And during that tenure of that very stressful time in my life, I actually picked a keystone project, which was the evolution of global connectivity and eSIM
Wow.
in the Canadian market, and what we should do at TELUS from a strategic perspective. And it just happened that when I finished the program, there was a leadership role in connectivity in the business solutions area. And so I grabbed it. And I think the rest is kind of
And the
history.
rest is history. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're the first person. I think we've done about 45, 46 of these IoT Leaders podcasts. And you're the first person who actually did a thesis as part of their MBA on connectivity and eSIM. That's a great way of getting into the role. And I actually wasn't aware of that story. So that's absolutely great. So let's go fast forward a bit. Now I've been in SI for about 6 years, and not long after I joined, we already had an interconnect, I think, at the time with TELUS. So we could access your network via our platform, but pretty soon afterwards, the conversation started to become a little bit more strategic. And you guys, and just for everybody listening, TELUS were the first company that actually said, no, we need a new global capability, and we're going to white label SI's solution. So essentially, what we're talking about here is TELUS have, I think, for 3 getting on 4 years, I think I'm right in that, been white labeling our solution. And you really were, from our point of view, a visionary in that. It must have been a hell of an MBA course. I was just thinking in retrospect, because you went first. And we'll get onto it later on in the podcast, that there's an awful lot of people now saying, "Oh, I've always believed that," which they didn't for a long time. But there's a bit of a stampede behind you. But you were the first by some way. I mean, we're talking probably between 4 and 5 years ago when the conversations first started. I think a lot of people listening to this will be very interested in that, because everything when things happen, it's obvious in retrospect, but when the first person jumps, then people say, "Why are you doing that?" So maybe you can give a little color, a little background. What drove that thought process inside TELUS?
So when we were, and it actually did culminate out of the MBA thesis, a lot of what we decided to do. One of the things that we were seeing in the Canadian market, and there was a lot of hype and talk about 5 years ago about this like emergence of eSIM or EUICC, and how everybody was going to take over and move into eSIM. And what that meant for the carriers was this was actually a competitive threat, because no longer were our customers tied to us, and they could move, right? They could move around. At least that was the thought at the time, 5 years ago, that they would just simply move around and it would be easy, and there would be millions and millions of these eSIMs in the market. And so we thought, okay, we have to, instead of holding our cards close to our chest, we need to think about how we become enabler of this capability. Because if you're an enabler of the capability, then your customers, you become the trusted advisor of your end customer, and you can actually grow in the face of competition. And so what that meant was we had to make a decision on whether we had that skill set to build this capability in-house, or we needed to go outside and look for somebody that already was doing that. And there's a few players in the market that were doing eSIM capabilities. But what we were really attracted with the SI solution was the fact that it wasn't just an EUICC capability that the SI team was able to provide for us. You had a multi-SIM switching capability that allowed you to put up to 11 profiles of like 11 different carrier MZ, we call them, or carrier profiles onto a SIM, which could be plastic or
Yeah.
virtual, and allowed that customer then to move the device around the world. And what we saw in the Canadian market is that well, there's lots of global players in the market. A lot of them are entering Canada and they're working in Canada. So how can we attract some of those customers into our ecosystem via our TELUS Global Connectivity platform powered by SI? Or how can we enable our customers to move outside of Canada? And one of the biggest use cases that we saw was actually around inventory. So when we think about like a fleet telematics organization or even a health application with a device at the end of it, most of those devices are shipped somewhere overseas for manufacturing. And in the world, original world, the end user would have a relationship with every carrier in every country that they sold that device. And they would have to ship the SIM cards from every carrier in every country to their manufacturer, who would then solder them in and place them inside, and they'd be in an airtight, protected location. Then the manufacturer has to then ship that inventory to all the distribution points around the world. And they would find that they have inventory surplus or shortage, but it's
Sure.
not like you can just ship a device from France to Germany or from Canada to the
Right.
US or vice versa simply. And so that was the use case that we grabbed a hold of, and we kind of structured a lot of what we were doing around that use case and had started to have conversations with the original equipment manufacturers to see what their thoughts were. And honestly, Nick, a lot of the companies thought they could do it themselves, right? They said, we're going to go and do our own eSIM, and we're going to create our own eSIM platform. And you guys just give us the connectivity.
Right.
And that's fine. But I think what we didn't think about 5 years ago is just how hard the device setup is and how hard setting up an eSIM and managing that eSIM ecosystem is. And so when we move forward with the SI platform, that was a big piece of what we wanted to do, was bring simplicity to the market and help our customers understand not just the device side of the business, but the connectivity side of the business and how important getting those put together were.
Not every listener, of course, listens to every podcast, so I'm in danger of repeating some things for some people. But we actually, going back to what you just said, Jodi, we we've been obviously saying that you want a full managed service for this, not a set of tools. You wouldn't build your own car. I guess some people do, but you won't buy a car, right? But actually, for an awful lot of people, they still say that. And so what I was referring to there is that we did a piece of research that you'll be well aware of, and people listening, it's on our website. And we interviewed 1,000 customers. No, 800 customers with 1,000 employees or more who had done an IoT project. So it wasn't just you're thinking of doing one. It was an IoT project. And we asked them a very specific set of questions, which is, in retrospect, when you look back, what was it that you thought was going to be easy and actually wasn't easy? And it's almost word for word what you said. And if you look at the findings, one of the first findings was they totally underestimated the importance of the device. And of course, in a world where you can be to some extent agnostic to the MNO, but we'll get onto that from a MNO white label, but where the IMSI, the operator, the profile can be switched. You need intelligence in the device. The firmware has to be optimized. And the integration with the modem and the restart, the switching, the timers. I mean, there's a lot of complexity there. And I always say, I blamed Mark Andreessen for setting market expectations by saying, "Oh, well, software is going to meet hardware. The cloud, the cloud's a computer in somebody else's office, so you don't have to worry about hardware anymore. It's over. It's over." But actually, with IoT, you not only had to worry about it. It was actually, I think it was 81% in the survey said the single biggest issue that they found was the device. And the second one they had was when they said that they would do it themselves, the administrative overhead of managing multiple contracts, as you say, manufacturing open devices, inserting local SIMs locally, which, by the way, in a region didn't give you 100% connectivity anyway. And so that didn't solve the problem. Limited set of roaming agreements failing, having to manage all those contracts, having to worry about roaming agreements breaking. I mean, it's just a very dynamic, sort of under the water set of parameters that most people had never even thought about, but is normal for people in the telecom industry. I mean, it's what happens. And they said, "Oh my God!" In retrospect, I'm becoming a telecom company when I actually want to be a vending machine company or a medical device company. And as I said, that was in retrospect, people say, no, that's the case. But it is interesting that it was kind of marketed, eSIM. Maybe interested in your view on this. eSIM and EUICC were almost marketed as the magic powder, or it was a magic wand that were just with a simple shake of eSIM and the EUICC standard. Suddenly we're all happy, smiling people holding hands, and interoperability.
That's what it was when I wrote my MBA thesis. Like the research was like, millions, billions of devices by 2020 we're going to be in an EUICC, and that we all know is not the case, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, the reality versus the perception was very different in this scenario.
Yeah. Do you think it was because you were you TELUS are a big player, but on the global stage, you're not one of the very, very biggest. So do you think, one thing I found when I was at Cisco for many, many years is that disruption is often embraced first by the challengers, not the huge incumbents. And so do you think that played part of this? Because you have some very big neighbors south of the border in the US, right?
Yeah, we have big neighbors south of the border, and we have big,
In Canada.
in Canada and even in Europe, right? And
Yeah.
so for sure, I don't know if being a more of a localized from a telco perspective, we were definitely not on the global stage, but we had a few capabilities that we've also invested in that I think drove not only our need for global capabilities, but helped us with having those conversations not just with SI but potential other carriers on how we would work
Yes.
together. And that would be our foray into TELUS Health, which was absolutely a global strategy on affecting healthcare at a global level. And then the second is our push in agriculture. The majority of our agriculture business is actually outside of Canada. And then we have TELUS International, which is our business process oriented organization, which has grown into a significant software development and data services capability over time. And so I think those three capabilities that we've got today within our umbrella have helped to foster our growth on a global scale from a tech company perspective, for sure.
And one of our previous podcasts was in the TELUS agriculture space with precision animals, who
Mhm.
are, as you know, a TELUS agriculture company. You invested in, but the very, very ambitious project, as you say, outside of Canada, in US, but then global, to actually solve the problems of the number one killer of cattle, which is BRD, bovine respiratory disease, or cow pneumonia. And that came directly out of that. So that's the type of deal which you and we wouldn't have even been aware of. In fact, the deal probably wouldn't have happened. The company wouldn't have been formed unless a solution was available for them to create a single global product SKU, in this case, a specialist router, or a router, as they call it in the US, that actually could be installed on a fence post anywhere in the world and can monitor
But I think that one is actually a really interesting use case that just actually solidifies the whole complexity around the device, right? Because in that situation, not only did we have to figure out how to get the connectivity on a global level, we had to figure out how to make that device work in the ecosystem that of which it was operating. And I think that that is another piece which moves kind of
right.
into the professional services side
And
of the business.
and specifically, how do you get tags, smart tags, onto sort of an 800 pound cow, and keep it there? And so the whole hardware had to be designed from scratch. And how do you get the data, and how do you use artificial intelligence to look at anomaly detection behavior in terms of the way the cattle move? I mean, it was a very interesting podcast. But again, they wouldn't, those two vets wouldn't have started that business unless there was a global capability. So that shines a light on another thing, which is people ask us, oh, is this replacement business? And actually, what we've said is because IoT was so very difficult, which you've talked about, actually you're addressing an unmet need. So it's incremental business. It's business that nobody is getting, because people say, unless you can give me a single global solution which works with all the devices and can be agnostic across the operators, and it's a single throat to choke, then I'm not going to do the project in the first place. So the great thing about this is, and no one's trying to replace anything. What we're actually saying is we're actually going to win brand new business, which is where the money is, because the money, the inverse Pareto, the money is in the 20% of companies that make 80% of things. And so it's the big companies, the big opportunities that need the single SKU. So it all makes sense. But again, you were a visionary. So let's go back to that. That was 4 years ago, I think we concluded it.
Mhm.
And full disclosure, you guys made an equity investment in us at the same time. So I'm talking to a shareholder. Thank you very much, an investor. But also, there's been a lot of learnings on both
Obviously.
sides. We were both plunging in together for the first time. So maybe we could share the learnings, maybe a couple of war stories. I don't know, but it's been a journey. Shall we put it that way?
Yeah, I'd say it's been absolutely a journey. And honestly, it's been the tuition value is immeasurable, right? From the journey that we've been on. And we can say we maybe hopefully have paved the way for others that are going to go on this journey for both parties, right? For SI and for TELUS in some of the learnings. I think we were maybe a little bit, the first learning is that we were perhaps a little bit overconfident in the number of customers that were going to flock onto our platform. And so one of the things that I think we learned is, unlike your simple, smaller domestic business, the sales cycle, the implementation cycle, and the amount of time it takes for the devices to actually become live on your network and billing, generating revenue, is significantly longer. And so thankfully we have patience, and we learned, because we are seeing that traction now, right? And I think both SI and TELUS are benefiting from some really significant wins that we've made in the market, and we're able to address client needs. But I think that was the first learning. And the second learning is, as much as I say how difficult the device onboarding is in this conversation right now, I think at the beginning we didn't really understand, as a carrier, just how complex putting a global EU eSIM is into a device, and just the complexity of that device onboarding. And I know there's been a lot of less learnings on the SI side, and you guys have, we can talk about the capabilities that SI has built in to simplify that device onboarding capability. But I think that culminates into frustration, right, on both party sides, that we had to kind of get through. And that was probably the second learning. And then the third learning, I would say, is, and I don't think we did this wrong, it's just a learning, is we went a little bit, we built processes that were meant for a small number of deals, right? So we could support a small number of deals between both organizations. And then it took longer to win those small number of deals. And so we became complacent in the current processes as they stood. And now we're seeing success. And so we need to amplify, right? We need to amplify on our processes. We need to generate more automation. We need to get better skill sets in-house, all of which we're working on. But I would say those are the three learnings that I have come out of this. And then just, it's not a learning, but it's an opportunity. How do we take what we've done, that these two organizations, and make it bigger so that we have more carriers collaborating on a global scale? And I think that can lead us into some conversations around just the importance of localization.
Yeah. So let's go there, because I think that is, as you say, that this is it has been a journey, but it's been a journey. It's sort of like, climbing Everest. Actually, it's been a journey to base camp.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you finally get there and go, whew, which is great. And then you realize I'm only at base camp. It might have taken 8 days to walk to base camp, but then you look up and go, oh my God. And the point is that as you say, the real issue here, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, is that the mobile network operator landscape, which I think is 820 or something like that companies, it has been for 40 years the dominant model, but based on the proprietary SIM. So not the eSIM, EUICC agnostic approach, but a proprietary SIM with a lock-in model, which works for consumer data, consumer voice, consumer video, works just fine. But it doesn't work for IoT for various reasons. And um, and and therefore, the moment you enable interoperability, agnostic interoperability, and virtualized switching from the cloud down to the device, or even from the device out to the cloud, then disruption happens, because what you really want is everybody. Ideally, if I'm a customer, I want everybody to offer this, not just one or two. Now, since we've done the worked with you and done the TELUS deal, we announced recently MTN. We're the second, all of Africa, 18 countries for MTN, which brings its own challenges. But that's probably going to go quicker because we're taking the joint learnings from TELUS, as you know. And then there are some others that are in the hopper, and you're involved in helping us there, which we can't talk about. But the thing is that there are those same industry trends that are happening in telecom in general are driving an even bigger need for this than there was 4 or 5 years ago, aren't they? So why don't we approach it from that direction? Because this idea of is the federation or the collaboration model actually the ultimate end game for the industry? So what would you see? What are the next big? What's next for the IoT market? In your role, you're looking at 5G. You're looking at IoT. You're looking at industry solutions. So let's start again with the strategy and work backwards. What do you think is the big challenges, that are big things that are coming next, and why does that increase the need for even more collaboration between the operators?
So let's start with 5G. So 5G is, I would say, for the most part, in carrier dependent. So the way that the infrastructure is built in each region by the carrier is very kind of localized for that carrier. But the capabilities that 5G enables are things like mass IoT deployments, where you can have like thousands and thousands of sensors operating off of one cellular tower and transport. And what that does is it creates increased capacity on the network. The second piece, though, that I think is starting to happen is actually not so much on the carrier's technology side. It's actually the evolution of technology in the market. So if we think about intelligent cars, if we think about intelligent intersections, all of those aspects have video attached to them. And video requires high reliability and low latency. And that's
Yeah.
something that 5G can provide in country.
Yes.
But in order to provide that capability outside of the country, roaming is not sufficient, because the way that roaming technology, and I'm not going to get into the roaming technology piece, but roaming technology has a greater latency issue than a localized network
Yeah,
would.
because if you're backhauling the data,
Backhauling back.
by definition, you've got a latency issue. Yeah.
Exactly. And so if we think about the fact that I think I've heard that a city the size of Paris actually evolves every year, in that's how big like congestion is going to become, and urbanization is becoming. And so in order to combat that, we need to think about how do we create automation in our cities ecosystems. And in order to do that, this will be an EUICC or an eSIM capability, because the OEM manufacturers are not going to want to operate locally with every carrier. And so as we evolve that, localization becomes really important. And in order for localization to occur, there needs to be a cooperation amongst the carriers, if that makes sense. And so it becomes not even co-opetition. It's really a federation, or an alliance, if you want to call it, amongst the carriers, that allows them to operate their capabilities inside other countries. And of course, reciprocity occurs, right, outside of that.
And you've said a lot of things there, and you unpack a few of them. And we obviously share that vision. And in fact, to the point where our federation, which is currently 16 operators, is kind of modeled on, you use the word alliance. It's modeled on the Star Alliance, because, we've seen this movie before. You had the airline industry, very successful, growing hugely as travel boomed, but massive frustration that as a consumer, you couldn't book one airline ticket that took you on competing carriers, or if you did fly into one city, they wouldn't let the gates be used by a competitive airline, so you couldn't do your connection, and eventually an entity. It's not that they all bought each other, but actually what happened is that a new entity emerged. In fact, there were more than one. Federation of Star Alliance is one example. United Lufthansa starting that off, but the idea of a collaborative co-opetition model, with people sharing infrastructure but having an agreed set of rules between the players, so they still retain their independence, and they can each sell their tickets and retain control of the customer, but they can access the resources of the federation as a whole. And that's what we've certainly built with the 16 operators. You talked about localization. It was another aspect of what you said, is that because if you're going to do URLCC, so ultra reliable low latency connections, which is one of the key capabilities of 5G, or network slicing, quality of service, it's one thing doing it as one operator, TELUS, two TELUS customers, and then you say, well, but what if it's a multi-operator solution through an aggregation platform? You then need those capabilities applied to everybody, and so you certainly are going to need, for the latency side, localization around a single network, because you can't do global deals and backhaul the video from a car from Asia to Europe or to the US. It's not going to work. So when you look at 5G and the use cases and the explosion of sensors, then it's hard to come to any other conclusion other than collaboration between the operators in some sort of model, where they agree the rules, but they stay independent, and the rules are executed by an independent third party, is the right way. Now, other people have tried to solve it another way. Here in the UK, Vodafone, started buying companies and think we're going to create a global operator by buying, I don't know how many they bought at the end of Vodafone subsidiaries. But that puts tremendous strain on the balance sheet, and you can't buy there's 100 and whatever it is, 90 countries. No one's got enough money to buy 190 operators to create one truly global one. So it's not going to work. And Vodafone have announced, the intent to spin it out for various reasons. One of which is the strain on the balance sheet, but the collaboration model seems to be inevitable. Are there other reasons why it's inevitable? Because you mentioned, if I go back, you mentioned about skills and the device. Device skills, device knowledge, device optimization do you think it's going to get even more important and more critical in a 5G world? And I'm thinking
I think it absolutely will.
multi-RAT.
It's not even it's the device, but also multi-rat. So if we think about kind of the way of the future where all things everywhere are connected, and it's very likely that that's going to occur. Today, there's different ways of connecting technology. One is a 5G wireless network, which is definitely probably the most prevalent method. But there is Wi-Fi, right? So there's local fixed access. And then the second one is satellite, which when you think about satellite, there are 5G satellite policies, right, that are coming to light. And if you think about the world, things move from areas of coverage to non-areas of coverage. And so when you speak about multi-rat, I think that it becomes a part of the federation, Nick, but I'm not exactly sure how it operates. I think what it means is that the federation is not just necessarily MNOs or carriers. The federation is a combination of carriers and other providers. So if we think like satellite is generally not a carrier provided service, right? But I think those are not that we have time, but the adoption of that is a bit slower, but it actually brings back the complexity of the device. So today, if we don't kind of work together, including SI, to determine how to make it simple for the manufacturers and the software developers to enable what we would call multi-rat. It prolongs the real opportunity.
Yeah.
So if you think about agronomy, right? If you think about agronomy and you have a farmer in Brazil that is shipping an avocado to London, they want to be able to trace that avocado from the farm in Brazil to the store in London, and that will require multiple types of access technology to do that.
And absolutely, and one area that you didn't refer to, which I know is big for you guys in Canada, because you got like the mining companies, is I would add to that list of multi-rat is to think about private networks.
Oh, yeah.
Because, although a lot of the operators will offer both public and private networks under their brand, there are a lot of, it's very easy. You can walk into a store and buy a private network and turn it on. And, there's a lot of private companies buying spectrum for private networks and implementing private networks. So now you've got this switch. The way it all makes sense to me is that, when you're in the cellular business, you think it's the center of the world, but actually, even today, cellular is only 13% of all connections, and actually, a lot of the growth, particularly at the low end, is obviously non-cellular, and there's a lot of other ones that we haven't even talked about, LoRa and others. But is that the device, in the ideal world, the device chooses the right connectivity for the use case and the conditions in which it finds itself at that time. So there's device resident intelligence, in other words, or does the switch, which is in the case of TGC, and we should have said your solution, white labeling our solution is called TGC, TELUS Global Connect, but the switch is in the cloud. It's in our connectivity management platform. It's in the cloud, but the vision we see is the switch is going down to the device, which is our Smart Connect offering, which you're fully aware of. When the device starts ultimately the device should choose its own connectivity and just handle everything. And that then could be one of the ways in which you can enable 5G. Based on the use case, the data, the signal strength, the cost, the latency, a lot of network state information will determine the right type of connectivity, the right BRAT, radio access type. And ultimately, it's really hard to do that in a world of billions of sensors if you're trying to do it in a abstracted cloud-based system, because you don't have access to that data, and you'll probably be wrong if you try and make a generic choice. So you almost need a long-tail personalization, device by device network switch capability, which works across 5G and all of the others. So that's actually many years worth of collaboration and technical problem solving to get to that point. So I think the thing, as you were saying, it's my base camp analogy. That's the mountain. We don't exactly know how we're going to get there, but it's coming, right? Because the proliferation of proprietary technologies and proprietary approaches could get even. We may have solved the SIM lock, but all these other proprietary communication protocols could be coming at us, implemented by different companies. So if I'm a user, the world could look worse rather than better going forward if I take a totally multi-rat view.
Well, that, and if we try to conquer this very large opportunity and problem and challenge, device by device, we will be in base camp for a very long time, right? So I think that's where when you speak of Smart Connect, which I'm very familiar with, I think there's a bit of a secret sauce there that needs to be explored in how can you use software to push intelligence into a device that allows for those capabilities versus trying to do firmware, right?
Which is
In
not
a device.
scalable. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the next challenge, Nick, that we need to figure out. But in order to do that successfully, you still require that collaboration amongst the carriers,
Yes.
and the radio access technology providers, right? So whether it's satellite or wireline, Wi-Fi, LoRaWAN, whatever it is.
Yeah, and that's where we were about 10 minutes ago, is that if you look at what's coming, and we just had a good conversation about what's coming, and there's lots of things we don't know coming that we will. And a year from now, we say, well, we didn't see that coming. So there'll be more stuff. You mentioned about trust. I've done podcasts based on, trust and carbon credits, auditability of data, public-private key encryption of data. I mean, there's a lot of things coming, which we're going to have to deal with, but all of them seem to point in. Climbing the mountain, you may not know which way you're going, but the general direction's up, right? And I think in this case, we might not know what's coming at us, but and how it's, because the standards in many cases aren't defined, and the standards of 5G is still not
Yes.
defined.
Agreed.
The standards for satellite release 17 that you talked about are still not defined. But what we generally know is that it's coming and it will get defined. But every one of these market developments, including areas we haven't talked about, like the use cases, today we have business use cases and we have consumer, but they're going to blend, right? They're going to be in the home. You're going to want your home security system to be a combination of consumer devices and a business monitoring service. In energy management in the home, similar sort of thing. The consumer devices is going to blend very much into with new technologies like Halo. Where Wi-Fi gets extended and goes through bricks much easier than the current standard. So all this massive amounts of change is going to come to us, and in every single one of them, whichever way we look at them, they seem to be reinforcing your point that the only way of doing this is collaboration between, and I like the point you made, not just the operators, but the operators and all the players. Right.
I agree. Like, I think that it's important, in order for us to I think in order for us to tackle this momentous opportunity and problem, and like you said, the strategy is to go to the top of the mountain, but we might have to go around it a couple times
Yeah.
before we get there and figure it out. But I think the opportunity is ripe, and we're seeing every day new use cases that come forward that just amplify the need for collaboration
Yeah.
across the different players in the market.
And a general awareness, I would say from an SI perspective. Well, you and I talk all the time, but we tend to meet face to face at Mobile World Congress every year.
Yes.
Such a fun show, isn't it? But anyway, that aside, but certainly the difference each year is that this conversation is reflective, certainly of this year's MWC. We had
Mhm.
a lot of conversations with a lot of operators who previously wouldn't even entertain the conversation about the need for a collaborative model. And of course, the reason is that the end users are defining it. It's where the money is. And back to the beginning, you did TGC because I talked about the deals that nobody was doing. We may have predicted 50 billion things connected by 2020, and we got to about 10 or 11 billion. We missed 80% of it. Those were deals that nobody got because you couldn't do a single SKU. You had to ship open devices. You had installation issues. You had all this complexity of
It
the
all comes down to scalability.
scale. And the moment you could have a single product SKU, then that's when customers start saying, "Oh, well, I'll actually do the project for the first time." And that's what you're seeing now with TGC, isn't it? Because you're scaling way outside of Canada. I mean, you're not, yes, you're a Canadian operator, but TGC is a truly global offering.
It is absolutely, and it's really exciting what we're seeing. And like I said, lots of tuition value, but what we're seeing now is really exciting and validating. I think to the original strategy that we spoke about 4.5 years ago when we first started, building out this plan. So.
Validated your MBA thesis, Jodi.
Yeah, because in my just to stop to end off with that, my thesis was around should we build a platform, Nick, or should we acquire or partner? And my
Ah,
thesis was not to build because network operators building platforms for end customers is likely going to be a very long, like we'd still be trying to build it, right? But there are players in the market, and so that's what actually culminated us to go out and look for who are the players in the market that could support the need. So
well, that is a great point to finish. And I will not so subtly point out that a lot of the conversations, certainly that we have with operators, and I know you're aware of a few of them, the default option is we're an operator, we can build this. So, yeah, there's a lot of education still. No one's saying that anyone's got the perfect solution, but I think the key thing I'm taking away from this is all of the trends in the industry, of which there are many in this $1 trillion industry called telecom. All of the trends do point towards the need for increased collaboration, which is fundamentally different to the model that the way telecom was built, proprietary. It's arguably one of the last and the biggest segments of industry where it's still essentially run on a proprietary stovepipe model.
Mhm.
And in most areas of the world, in most areas of tech, interoperability and standards have already happened at every layer of the ISO stack or whichever way you look at it. And telecom has held out, but I think we can, as we said, we can
we're
hear
seeing some
clicking
cracks.
sound.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
seems to be cracks in that. And honestly, some of my favorite conversations are with carriers across the globe, just listening to the same problems, right? So I think that collaboration opportunity is really starting to unfold.
Well, Jodi, thanks so much. Thank you for being a visionary. Thank you for taking your MBA course. What a smart move that was. I know from our statistics on the IoT Leaders podcast that a lot of operators listen to this. So I think this will have got a lot of airtime shall we say, with a lot of operators. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for being my guest on the podcast. Thanks for the collaboration. And it's good to know that we've just got a few little last details to hammer out, and then we'll have solved all the problems in telecom. Yeah.
That's right. No problem. We'll get that next week. It was
Yeah.
always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure, Nick. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And thank you to our listeners. And thank you to Jodi, who's the VP, as I said, of 5G and Industry Solutions at TELUS, and is bringing her MBA to life whilst climbing Everest. That's my summary.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Jodi, and I'll talk to you soon.